Anthony Armstrong Jones lived a life draped in elegance, talent, and royal glamour. Yet beneath the polished surface lurked secrets darker than anyone imagined. Affairs, betrayals, hidden children, and a DNA bombshell that erupted decades later, even during his honeymoon. His story isn't just scandalous, it rewrites everything we thought we knew about the man who married a princess. Origins wrapped in privilege and pain. Born into privilege but never truly at home within it, Anthony Armstrong Jones entered the world surrounded by refinement, brilliance, and social prestige. His father, a formidable barrister, and his mother, a radiant figure in London's elite circles, projected the image of a flawless family. Yet behind the polished facade, their marriage was quietly falling apart. Just before Anthony turned 5, the illusion collapsed. His parents divorced, splintering the foundation of his childhood. Swept into his mother's new life, he watched her marry with breathtaking speed, this time to Lawrence Parsons, the 6th Earl of Ross. Overnight, Anthony was thrust into the glittering world of aristocracy, ascending from upper-class comfort to the rarefied air of noble lineage. But the elevation came with a cruel twist. Inside the grand estates and echoing halls of his new home, Anthony found himself an outsider. His mother soon had 2 new children, true heirs in blood and title, while Anthony became the reminder of a past she seemed eager to leave behind. He dined under chandeliers, walked through stately rooms, and slept behind carved doors, yet the emotional warmth expected of such surroundings never reached him. Instead, he learned early that luxury could coexist with loneliness, and that being surrounded by privilege was no guarantee of being wanted. His childhood became a quiet lesson in exclusion, raised among the elite, yet never quite accepted by them, wrapped in privilege, yet marked by a growing sense of not belonging. These early fractures would follow him into adulthood, shaping his desires, his insecurities, and ultimately the relationships, scandalous and destructive, that would entangle him with a princess and ripple through the royal family for decades. The outsider in the noble house. Stepping into aristocracy should have been a dream, but for Anthony Armstrong Jones, it became the beginning of a deeper, quieter nightmare. When his mother married the 6th Earl of Ross, the door to a grander world swung open, but it opened just wide enough for him to slip inside as a guest, never a true member of the family. Suddenly, Anthony found himself living inside sprawling estates, moving through rooms lined with ancestral portraits, staring down in silent judgment. The Ross family name carried centuries of history, and Anthony, a child of a previous marriage, fit awkwardly into the lineage. Where others saw privilege, he felt the weight of being almost noble, but not quite. His mother's new children, born into aristocratic blood, became the stars of this carefully curated world. They were embraced as heirs, the rightful continuation of the Ross legacy. And Anthony, he was tolerated, present, but peripheral, a shadow drifting at the edges of family portraits, a polite curiosity in the eyes of visiting nobles. Servants, steeped in the rigid hierarchies of Old England, sensed the unspoken rules. Their deference flowed easily toward the Earl's legitimate children, while interactions with Anthony carried a subtle chill, respectful but distant, as if they knew he occupied a space he wasn't meant to fill. Inside this grand new life, Anthony learned early how it felt to be overlooked. Dinner conversations passed him by. Family decisions were made without him. He wasn't mistreated outright, just gently, consistently sidelined. And sometimes, the softest exclusions cut the deepest. The message sank in slowly but unmistakably. You are here, but you are not one of us. These years carved something sharp and restless inside him, a hunger to be seen, to be chosen, to matter. A craving that would later push him toward the spotlight of London's creative world and into reckless, intoxicating romances that filled the void his childhood left behind. In the stately rooms of the Ross estate, among the carved banisters and manicured lawns, Antony was supposed to gain status. Instead, he gained something far more dangerous, a wound invisible to others, but powerful enough to shape the scandals, betrayals, and explosive secrets that would one day unravel his life and nearly shake the royal family itself. A childhood wounded by illness and abandonment. For a boy already feeling like a misfit in his own family, fate had yet another cruel twist waiting. During what should have been an ordinary holiday in Wales, Anthony Armstrong Jones fell violently ill, struck by polio, the terrifying disease that haunted an entire generation. Overnight, the lively, sensitive child was reduced to a small, trembling figure fighting to keep control of his own body. He was rushed to the Liverpool Royal Infirmary, where he would remain for 6 excruciating months. 6 months of fear, pain, and uncertainty. 6 months of watching other children come and go while he stayed, trapped in a bed that felt more like a prison. And worst of all, 6 months of waiting for family who never came, except for one. Only his sister visited, not his mother, now absorbed in her noble marriage and new aristocratic life. Not his father, wrapped in the cold formality of his barrister's world. Just his sister, one small ray of loyalty in a childhood swiftly dimming. For Antony, the silence of those empty doorways said more than words ever could. In a house where he already felt secondary, his illness confirmed a truth no child should ever have to learn. He was not worth the sacrifice of being missed. When he finally recovered, walking again, though with a subtle limp that would follow him for life, he returned not to a family reunited by fear or softened by worry, but to a household that had continued exactly as if nothing had happened. There was no great embrace, no tearful reunion. Instead, he was promptly shipped off to a series of boarding schools, as though the months of loneliness had been preparation for a lifetime of being sent away. At Eton, amid the rigid traditions and echoing halls of privilege, Antony carved out small rebellions, photography, rowing, boxing, interests that soothed him, challenged him, allowed him to construct an identity separate from the indifferent family he'd left behind. But even as he learned to mask his vulnerability with charm and ambition, the wound remained. He had survived polio, but he would never fully recover from the abandonment. Those months alone in a hospital bed had carved a hollow into his heart, a hollow that would later demand to be filled by admiration, affection, desire, and danger. A hollow that would drive him toward fame, toward scandal, and ultimately toward the arms of a princess who had wounds of her own. The world would come to see Anthony Armstrong Jones as glamorous, wickedly talented, unpredictable. But beneath every rumor, every affair, every shocking revelation, lay the same truth. He was still that little boy in the hospital, waiting for someone to show up. Lost in education, saved by a lens. By the time Anthony Armstrong Jones returned to school, he had already learned 2 harsh truths. Families can disappoint you, and survival requires reinvention. Boarding schools became his new reality, one rigid institution after another, each with its own rules, expectations, and cold stone walls. They were designed to shape young men into leaders of Britain. But for Antony, they became escape routes, places where he could loosen the grip of a childhood that had never really wanted him. At Eton, he drifted through academics but gravitated toward passions that made him feel alive. Rowing gave him discipline, boxing gave him release, but photography gave him identity. Behind a lens, he discovered something intoxicating: power. The power to frame a moment, to control a narrative, to capture others in ways no one had ever captured him. It was the first thing in his life he could truly call his own. So when he entered Cambridge, it seemed like a chance to begin fresh. A new world, a noble institution, a place where he might finally belong. But destiny rarely offered Antony a straight line. He enrolled in natural history, quit 10 days later, switched to architecture, and then stumbled again, failing his second exams and watching the opportunity collapse like a badly drawn blueprint. It was humiliating, and worse, predictable. Another path that led nowhere. Another confirmation that he didn't quite fit the shape the world expected him to fill. His family's reaction didn't help. Encouragement came from distant relatives, but from his own parents? Indifference. His mother and stepfather dismissed photography as a frivolous pursuit, unworthy of his new aristocratic connections. His father barely noticed. The message was the same as always: be someone else, just not yourself. Then came his first heartbreak. Lady Barbara North, the woman he adored, chose another man, a better man, the world seemed eager to remind him. As if fate were mocking him, Antony was hired to photograph their wedding a mere 3 months later. Standing behind the camera, forced to immortalize her joy with someone else, he learned a lesson sharp enough to leave a scar. If he wanted happiness, he would have to take it before someone else did. That realization ignited something fierce inside him. If society wouldn't open its doors, he would slip through the cracks. If the world wouldn't hand him a place, he would build one with his own hands. And with his camera as both weapon and shield, Antony began to step into the glamorous, seductive, and dangerous world of London's creative elite, setting him on a path that would lead to fame, temptation, scandal, and eventually straight into the heart of the royal family. The rise of a rebel photographer. London in the 1950s was a city humming with reinvention, fashion, theater, art, youth culture, and into this electric world stepped Antony Armstrong Jones, armed with nothing but a camera and a hunger to prove himself. What began as a hobby, a quiet refuge from a lonely childhood and disappointing parents, was about to transform into the force that would launch him into the circles of fame, desire, and scandal that defined his life. Antony had something the polished aristocrats didn't: edge. His photos were bold, alive, intimate. They captured not just faces but secrets, making him irresistible to London's rising stars. He photographed actors, dancers, models, socialites, and the more talent he showed, the bolder he became. His studio on Pimlico Road became legend, a place where art mixed with seduction, where glamorous young women posed for him by day and partied with him by night. The rumors began quickly, whispers of affairs, both with the women he photographed and with the men who drifted in and out of his creative orbit. London society feigned shock while eagerly inviting him deeper into their world. But behind the wild nights and flirtations, Antony was relentless in his pursuit of success. Fashion photography? He conquered it. Theater portraits? Mastered. Studio work? Brilliant. Then he set his sights higher: the royal family. It was a daring ambition for a man known as much for scandal as for talent. Yet his charm proved irresistible. His fresh, unconventional style caught the eye of none other than Queen Elizabeth II. She commissioned him to photograph her family, entrusting him with an intimacy few outsiders ever received. In that moment, Antony crossed an invisible threshold, from eccentric artist to someone the monarchy welcomed into its inner circle. London society buzzed. Who was this man who broke rules so effortlessly? Who charmed queens and dancers with the same disarming ease? Who lived life like a man making up for every childhood disappointment, one reckless thrill at a time? Even as public fascination grew, Antony began guarding his private life more carefully. Only one romance reached the tabloids: his on and off affair with showgirl Jackie Chan. But insiders whispered that she was merely a cover, camouflage for relationships far more forbidden and explosive. Because behind the camera, unseen by the world, another story was unfolding. A secret connection with a woman whose own life had been shaped by longing, heartbreak, and the crushing weight of royal expectation. Her name was Princess Margaret, and Antony's rise, from wounded child to London's most seductive photographer, was about to collide with the forbidden, intoxicating world of royalty in a way that would change both their lives forever. A forbidden spark inside Buckingham Palace. By the late 1950s, Antony Armstrong Jones had become more than a photographer. He was a phenomenon. London adored him, the arts world desired him, and even the royal family welcomed his lens. Yet none of them knew that one of the most explosive romances in modern royal history was quietly taking shape behind the velvet curtains of Buckingham Palace. It began innocently, almost imperceptibly. While photographing the royal family, Antony struck up conversations with Princess Margaret, the glamorous, sharp-tongued younger sister of Queen Elizabeth II. She was elegant, wounded, and mysterious, still reeling from the heartbreak of her forbidden love with Captain Peter Townsend. The world saw her as a tragic royal trapped in duty. Antony saw something else entirely, a woman starved for freedom, authenticity, and desire. Their friendship deepened in secret. Late-night conversations about art, loneliness, expectations, moments stolen between official engagements, a connection that bloomed not with fireworks, but with the quiet certainty of two people who recognized each other's scars. For Margaret, Antony was everything royal life wasn't: unpredictable, artistic, rebellious. For Antony, Margaret was everything his childhood had denied him: attention, admiration, the intoxicating feeling of finally being chosen. But there was danger in their closeness. She was the Queen's sister. He was the outsider who had spent his life on the fringes of belonging. And Margaret, after years of being shredded by the press, refused to let another romance be devoured by public scrutiny. So they hid. At public events, they exchanged polite nods. Behind palace doors, they shared glances charged with meaning. In private, they found the space that neither of them had ever been given: space to be human. But secrecy has a way of intensifying desire. And in the shadows of royal corridors, their relationship deepened into something far more dangerous than friendship. Their stolen moments became whispers. Their whispers became fire. And soon Antony found himself entangled in a love that was both irresistible and impossibly fragile. Yet even as Margaret clung to this new hope, the royal family braced themselves. They had watched her heart nearly break beneath public judgment once before. They vowed not to let it happen again. This time, discretion was their shield, and Antony their unpredictable variable. He was brilliant, charming, and known for the kinds of scandals that kept London gossip columns alive. Could a man like that fit into the rigid, polished machinery of royalty? Could a princess risk her heart again on someone whose world was built on temptation? Nobody knew, not even Antony. But one thing was clear: their secret could not stay hidden forever. And when it finally came to light, it would ignite a royal firestorm unlike anything Britain had seen. The rebel photographer and the wounded princess were heading straight toward a collision course, one that would reshape not only their lives, but the very image of the modern monarchy. A secret love demands a royal sacrifice. As the bond between Antony Armstrong Jones and Princess Margaret deepened, their romance became a fragile flame flickering in the drafty corridors of Buckingham Palace. Brilliant, yet vulnerable. Too bright to remain hidden forever. But the world had not forgotten Margaret's last heartbreak. The royal family certainly hadn't, and they were determined not to let history repeat itself. This time, secrecy wasn't a luxury. It was survival. For a while, they managed to exist in two separate realities. To the public, Margaret was the Queen's dutiful sister, recovering from a love she had been forced to abandon. Behind closed doors, she was a woman laughing, dreaming, and daring to hope again in the presence of a man who saw her not as a symbol, but as a person. But love, real love, always demands something. and Margaret's love demanded sacrifice. The royal family, cautious and controlling, began to lay down terms. If Antony truly wanted to be with Margaret, he couldn't just pose for magazine covers or photograph London's glittering stage stars. He couldn't continue hosting raucous studio parties or reveling in the swirling bohemia that fueled his reputation. A future with Margaret meant stepping out of the world he had built and into a cage lined with gold. He would have to give up his photography career. Not officially, not explicitly, but in every way that mattered. To marry a princess, Antony would need to shed the identity that had finally given him power, validation, and control. It was the cruelest joke fate had played on him yet. Just when he had escaped the shadows of his childhood, he was asked to walk right back into a role defined by constraint. Long before the press even suspected the romance, Antony began quietly turning away from the career that had lifted him from obscurity. He loosened his grip on commissions, declined high-profile assignments, and started stepping back from the creative world that once felt like oxygen in his lungs. He may have been a rebel, but he wasn't naive. He knew what marrying a royal meant. He knew the palace would rather mold him into something safe and predictable than accept him as he was. But the promise of Margaret, her warmth, her laughter, her understanding, was worth the risk. Then, in a stunning twist that blindsided the nation, everything changed. In early 1960, without leaks, rumors, or tabloid whispers, a brief palace announcement detonated across Britain. Princess Margaret was engaged to Antony Armstrong Jones. It was a royal reveal delivered with surgical precision, a shockwave timed so perfectly that even the press, usually 2 steps ahead of every secret, stood stunned. London erupted with curiosity. Who was this man? This photographer, this commoner, who had managed to win the heart of a princess? Was he a romantic savior or a scandal waiting to happen? One person, however, did not share the excitement. Antony's father responded with icy skepticism. He doubted his son was suited for the role. He even compared living in Buckingham Palace to being confined in barracks, a warning disguised as cynicism. And as history would prove, he wasn't entirely wrong. Because while the world celebrated a fairy tale, neither Antony nor Margaret knew what waited on the other side of I do. They didn't yet understand that love, no matter how passionate, couldn't soften the ruthless machinery of royal life. They didn't know that promises made in secret often crumble under the weight of public duty. Their engagement was the beginning of a dream, and the first step into a storm that would one day destroy them both. A royal wedding wrapped in shadows. The engagement of Antony Armstrong Jones and Princess Margaret stunned Britain, but the wedding that followed was nothing short of historic. On May 6, 1960, millions of viewers watched the first-ever televised royal wedding, dazzled by the spectacle of a commoner marrying the glamorous sister of the Queen. It looked like a fairy tale, shimmering with promise. But behind the glitter, trouble was already stirring. The first crack appeared even before the ceremony. Antony had chosen his closest friend, Jeremy Fry, as best man, only for a palace investigation to uncover a scandal involving Fry's arrest in a public restroom. The palace scrambled to bury the incident, crafting a polite excuse for his sudden absence. But the message to Antony was chillingly clear. Your world is under our microscope now. After the vows and the grand carriage procession, the couple escaped to the Caribbean for a 6-week honeymoon. 6 weeks of sun, secrecy, and a fragile illusion of peace. They missed major events, including the birth of Jeremy Fry's child, a detail that would later explode into one of Antony's darkest scandals. When they returned to London, reality sharpened its claws. Certain circles of the British press sneered at the marriage, branding Antony as too common for a princess. Even within palace walls, old-world snobbery whispered that he did not belong. Some servants treated him with thinly veiled disdain, as if he were a guest trespassing in royal territory rather than a newly minted member of the family. One butler in particular became a nightmare, lasting just 25 days before selling stories to the press, painting a distorted, damaging portrait of life inside the couple's home. And then came the tension with Prince Philip. Where Philip was rugged and militaristic, Antony was artistic, delicate, and rebellious. Their personalities clashed instantly, igniting a quiet rivalry that simmered beneath every palace dinner and official outing. Antony had given up his career for this life, but instead of finding purpose, he found walls closing in around him. Margaret, bruised by past heartbreak and suffocated by royal expectations, began slipping into loneliness. Together, they were supposed to be a royal power couple. Instead, they were two wounded souls trapped in a gilded cage neither fully understood. The fairy tale was cracking, and the real story, far darker and far more scandalous, was only just beginning. Cracks in the crown. The world still imagined Antony Armstrong Jones and Princess Margaret as a glamorous royal couple, but inside the palace, their marriage was unraveling fast. Antony, stifled by royal expectations, slipped back into the seductive world he knew best: late-night parties, creative circles, and the dangerous thrill of women who weren't princesses. His closeness to Vogue editor Pamela Collin crossed every boundary, turning work trips into thinly veiled escapes. The palace claimed Margaret stayed behind due to royal duties, but everyone close to them understood the truth. Antony no longer wanted her at his side. Margaret's response wasn't silence. It was retaliation. Wounded and furious, she drifted toward other men, seeking the affection Antony withheld. She spent time with Anthony Barton and flirted with actor Peter Sellers, while the tabloids erupted with rumors linking her to Mick Jagger and Warren Beatty. Most of it was exaggeration, but one affair was undeniably real: her intense emotional relationship with Robin Douglas Home, a talented pianist and the nephew of a former prime minister. With Robin, Margaret found comfort and tenderness, two things she no longer found in her marriage. When Antony discovered them together at Kensington Palace, the fragile peace between husband and wife shattered. Robin's own marriage collapsed, and he began divorce proceedings, a sign that his connection with Margaret was more than a fleeting distraction. Antony acted swiftly and strategically. He intercepted a letter Robin wrote to Margaret, delivered it to the Queen Mother, and then demanded that Margaret end the relationship immediately. It was a cold, calculated move that shifted blame onto her while protecting his own image. 18 months later, Robin Douglas Home died by suicide at just 36. The tragedy didn't bring Margaret and Antony closer. Instead, it ignited a bitter war. Antony humiliated her with cruel notes and cutting remarks, sometimes silencing her in public with insults meant to sting. Guests were horrified, but the royal family, strangely, often sided with him. Margaret, numbing her pain with alcohol and poor choices, became the scapegoat, while Antony's charm kept him protected. Their marriage, once a royal triumph, had become a battlefield no crown could disguise. The photograph that ended a marriage. By the late 1960s, the marriage of Antony Armstrong Jones and Princess Margaret had deteriorated into a brittle shell. Habits of infidelity, resentment, and silence woven so tightly that even the palace could no longer pretend everything was fine. They lived parallel lives, intersecting only for official duties, drifting further apart with every passing month. And then, on a quiet Caribbean island, everything exploded. Mustique had always been Margaret's sanctuary, a place where she could breathe freely, far from the suffocating expectations of the crown and the coldness of her marriage. It was there she met Roddy Llewellyn, a charming young landscape gardener 18 years her junior. What began as companionship transformed into something deeper: joy, laughter, youth, things Margaret had not felt in years. But royal secrets don't stay buried for long. Rupert Murdoch dispatched a clever journalist to Mustique, disguised as a wealthy traveler. The trap was simple, brutal, and effective. Hidden among tourists, the journalist captured the photograph that would ignite a scandal across the world. Margaret, relaxed and radiant beside Roddy, too intimate, too carefree, too real. When the photo hit the press, Britain erupted. Headlines screamed betrayal, the palace scrambled. And Antony, who had long maintained his own affairs, suddenly found himself publicly humiliated in a way he'd never anticipated. For years, they had both played the game privately. Now, the world knew. Antony acted first. Fed up with the charade and empowered by public sympathy, he announced their legal separation, without Margaret's consent and without informing the royal family. It was a bold, defiant move, a final strike in their long, bitter war. But the palace had a surprise of its own. After years of resisting scandal, the monarchy finally agreed to an official divorce. In 1978, their marriage, once celebrated by millions, ended quietly. Antony wasted no time. Within 5 months, he married Lucy Lindsay Hogg, the woman who had been by his side long before the separation was made public. Margaret, stunned and blindsided, watched as Antony stepped seamlessly into a new life, leaving behind the wreckage of the old one. The royal fairy tale was not just broken. It had been pulverized piece by betrayal, loneliness, revenge, and a single photograph that revealed more truth than any royal statement ever could. The second marriage and the return of old demons. For a moment, it seemed Antony Armstrong Jones had finally found peace. His marriage to Lucy Lindsay Hogg offered a calmer world. No palace walls, no royal scrutiny, no suffocating expectations. With Lucy's warmth and patience, Antony appeared to have stepped into a gentler chapter of life. They welcomed a daughter, embraced a quieter routine, and the chaos of his marriage to Princess Margaret seemed to fade into the background. But Antony had never been a man who lived quietly. The storms inside him were never truly gone, only waiting. Even as he settled into domestic comfort, Antony slipped into a secret affair with Anne Hills, a married journalist whose vulnerability drew him in and whose devotion would cost her everything. What began as a hidden romance stretched on for 2 decades, 20 years of longing, secrecy, and a hope she refused to abandon. Antony gave her pieces of his life, but never enough. And while Lucy believed she had married a calmer man, Anne Hills lived in the shadows, waiting for promises Antony would never keep. In 1996, her world collapsed. After losing her job at The Guardian, abandoned by a boyfriend, and passing yet another Christmas alone, Anne Hills took her own life. She left behind a heartbreaking note declaring her love for Antony and requesting the return of a family heirloom he had given her. When investigators found her diaries, every detail of their secret, 20-year relationship poured into the press. Lucy was blindsided. The world was stunned. Antony offered no explanations. But even that wasn't the end. 2 years later, in another devastating blow, Lucy discovered Antony had fathered a child with Melanie Cable Alexander, a magazine editor nearly 30 years younger than him. This time, there were no shadows to hide in. Antony confessed, and Lucy, the woman who had tolerated his moods, defended him, believed in him, finally broke. Supporting an ex-wife, a mistress, multiple children, and a spiraling public image pushed Antony into financial strain. In desperation, he encouraged Melanie to accept a massive magazine payout for her story, an act that only deepened the wounds he had inflicted on Lucy. Their marriage collapsed. Lucy filed for divorce. Antony moved on with startling speed, juggling multiple girlfriends despite his failing health and the muscular atrophy left by childhood polio. The world saw him as brilliant, charming, irresistible. But behind every new romance was the same old truth. Antony Armstrong Jones could never outrun himself.